next Wednesday.
Oh, are you? Is that your first one?
Yeah.
Nice.
You see, another one of the things added to my mix is.
Yeah, seriously. Well, let's be sure to talk that up here because this practice platform is exciting.
Oh, yeah, and launching another round of integral Dharma training on Buddhist Geeks, so that's
Oh,
really
let's
relevant.
let's plug all that. So let's see here. We are now streaming. Let me pull my windows
Sweet.
back into place. There we go. Ryan, what's up, dude?
Hello. All right, I'm getting all the windows in front of me as well. Okay, I
Oh,
got them.
oh, you getting the
Cool.
feedback loop?
No
Oh,
feedback
okay.
loop. Thank goodness.
The endless cycle of
Yeah.
you.
Incepting myself.
Well, it's good to see you, brother.
Good to see you too. It feels
Yeah.
like it's been, I don't know why, the last month felt longer. Like
It's I'm guessing it's because we haven't been able to actually publish that episode, so it feels like
maybe there
the
was just a gap.
duration's been so
Yeah.
long.
Yeah.
So just so
True.
everyone knows, we've been dealing with some particularly nasty site bugs on integrallife.com, which have all been harmless, just really, really frustrating. And in the first plug for the show, I just want to shout out Ryan, your company, Power Up Productions.
Mhm.
I brought this job to you guys, and y'all got these bugs squashed in like a day after I banged
So
my face against the wall for a week. So
yeah, super happy, and because obviously, hey, it impacts us here on this show. So I'm happy we got that episode up today, and so it's a double dose of Inhabit
yeah,
today.
that's right. So on integrallife.com, you can see last month's episode, Inhabit Your Shadow. And today's episode is actually related in a lot of ways. I mean, I thought it was an interesting transition because Ryan, you and I were talking yesterday and a couple days ago about, what are we going to do for this show? And we
Yeah.
realized that, we're kind of in the midst of this really rapid ramp up to the election in November. So
Yeah.
what we wanted to do is kind of continue our ongoing conversation. All of these episodes kind of bleed into each other, which I think is
Yeah.
one of the really cool ways that we've structured this show. But we wanted to use this show as sort of a transition between some of the conversations we've been having, which are totally evergreen conversations, meaning, you can listen to them 5 years from now. They'll be just as relevant then as they are
We hope
now.
so.
And yeah, hopefully. And now we're going to be, kind of folding in some more kind of topical aspects of this while still keeping it evergreen. You know what I mean? I don't want these conversations to feel to people like, oh, that was particular to that election way back then, and I don't need to listen to this now. I mean, we're going to be talking about inhabiting fear, sort of generally, in our own lives, in our own practices, in our own sort of day-to-day existence. And we're going to be applying some of that to, many of the fears that are being generated both within us and sort of without us, all the time, that we're all sort of suspended in. So we're going to be trying to how to basically get a handle on fear without pushing it away, without pushing it into our shadows, and without letting it sort of consume us.
Yeah.
How to create sort of a more embodied response to fear,
Yeah.
so that we find fear within ourselves rather than ourselves in fear.
Yeah. Yep. It's super relevant. And it's definitely got, I mean, fear factor went up a ton due to pandemic earlier this year, and also political situations and things like that, general state of the world. But seems like in the last month, just my personal observations, that it's kicked up even higher. Like it's returning to some previous levels, like how I see it show up, in social media and what people are expressing, and like how intense an expression can be that seems out of fear, whether warranted or whether, an overreaction. So, and you were talking about that, like sometimes fear is a really useful experience that helps us to respond. And then sometimes it gets the best of us and robs us of our ability to respond. And even just that's partly maybe the practice there is trying to determine what flavor we're experiencing in any given moment. And but it's also, good to keep in mind we have to do that in connection to whatever situation we're responding to or reacting to. And so that right now, it's just like the whole political sphere, at least in the United States, but it really feels that way across a lot of countries in the world right now, that people are experiencing different flavors and forms of it. But doesn't seem there's too many countries sitting here being like, yeah, this is easy, we got it, no problem.
Right.
I mean, New Zealand, maybe New Zealand. New Zealand's probably the country that seems overall that they're, at least from the outside, they're like, yeah, we're good.
Yeah, we got this.
We're good. We're happy with our situation, but the rest of us,
Yeah.
not so
Well,
much.
and you know, the pandemic is a great obvious and, you know, very obvious sort of example for this, because not only do we have sort of this fear of the pandemic itself and of getting sick and what it can do to our loved ones and our family, but we also have these compounding fears that are sort of being layered on top of that. So, you know, on
Yes.
one side of the aisle, it's this fear that all of this is, you know, manufactured conspiracy and it's all part of sort of this global effort to, you know, exert more control over the population and things like that. So all of these narratives are being, and counter narratives and counter narratives are all
Yeah.
basically being driven by fear, and all of that is just being turned up to 11 now in, you know, sort of election season, where, you know, I'm not usually the kind of guy who likes to say both sides, you know what I mean? Because I think 9 out of 10 both sides statements are really, really missing a sense of proportionality.
Yeah.
But
Right.
that said, right now I can definitely say that the fear is coming out from both sides. You know, it's coming from the left in terms of the fears that people are feeling around possible Trump reelection. I would even say around a probably likely Trump reelection. You know, personally, I
Yeah.
hope I'm wrong, but it seems, you know, I mean, at this point, it feels like a kind of a coin toss, and a lot of people, I think, are trying to find a relationship with those kinds of fears. Um, on the other hand, you know, you have, these sort of news mills that are pumping out just raw sort of amygdala content and stoking our fears about things like Antifa and the protests and the violence and the looting and immigration. I mean, if you remember in 2018, the big fear tactic was this enormous caravan that was about to invade the country. And then funny enough, the day after the midterms, that wasn't a story anymore. So
Yeah.
we're being sort of pumped full of fear these days.
Yes.
And whether we know it or not, it's going to skew our perception, sort of our lenses,
Yeah.
and our informational terrain, which was something that we talked about last month.
Yes. Um, I was trying to write down one point that you brought up that made me think of something here. I lost it.
Yeah, that happens.
Gosh, no, it was an important one though for me. It'll come back around. But yeah, the influence, I think that's important to know of like how we're being influenced, you know, because, and I think a lot of us have been paying attention to that. Oh, I remember what my point was, is that the raw experience of fear is always just what it is. Like there's one layer is just a matter of fact. If a person is experiencing fear, it doesn't matter anything else past that, whether it's rational or irrational or whatever you might say about it. But if a person is experiencing fear, they're experiencing fear. It's something direct, visceral, and we can acknowledge that. Now, we still get to acknowledge later what a person does with that fear. Do we feel that what we're doing with our fear is valid or not? That can be, we can criticize that. We can talk about that and debate that. But just acknowledging the raw level of fear is really important. And actually, I think we mentioned this before. We mentioned this before of like the hopelessness of acknowledging that, you know, because that's people experiencing that a lot. But just imagine, like, regardless of whoever you're thinking about, like, think of the people who annoy you the most politically, okay? Because we all have our particular brands and flavors that are just like, oh my gosh.
Can I do my
That,
list?
yeah, sure, we'll probably hit them as we go here. But like, you know, if that person started off not saying all the intense stuff that they're saying, the reactions and what they think should happen, blah, 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 how the world is. If they just first off started saying, I'm scared, how does that change things? Like if they go, I'm really scared, because it changes it a little bit. You know what I mean? Even if in the end we go, okay, I understand, and you're scared. I can see how for you you're fearful. Okay, and what you're suggesting in terms of strategy and decisions, that doesn't seem great. And I even think about that for me. Let's talk like just one of on my list. If I think of like wondering, gosh, it's such a bizarre thing to think about some of the people who support Trump. Like some of the people I get from their perspective, I go, oh yeah, I get why that person supports Trump. But there's some people where I go, I don't know how you do that. You know, like I've been watching some CNN in Spanish and the comments, there. And this is from, you know, Latinos in Mexico and or from Mexico and in the United States. And I go, I, I don't know how you're like, yeah, Trump. I'm like, I mean, I can think about it from an integral perspective. I then find answers, but up front, I'm just like, what the hell? It
Yeah.
doesn't make sense to me. But really, like, there's a part of fear where we don't have to make sense out of it if we hear that. But a lot of people don't say that. Like, how many times we see on Facebook or Twitter, somebody just start off saying, I'm scared. Some people do
Yeah.
that, but a lot of people don't say it. They're just they come from anger. Like, it's just bypass fear and just like right to anger and certainty and solutions and dismissals and all this stuff. And then,
All of
and
which
then,
is a reaction to fear. I mean, if you're,
yeah,
if you're
yeah,
suspended in this ongoing state of terror, you're going to
yeah,
look for solid ground wherever you can find it. And, hey,
yeah,
good news. A lot of these sort of more regressive structures give you that sense of solid ground. I mean, it tells you exactly where you are in location to
yes.
everything else around
And
you.
And I think I would say we, but like those of us who are trying, who feel like we have the space and ability to look at the larger situation, which is kind of a privilege, to be able to like say, oh, I can sit back rather than like I'm only dealing with survival, like minute to minute. We have a little bit of space here to just have this conversation. But you know, when I was talking about like sometimes like I see somebody supporting Trump and I go, I don't even know how that person, even from their perspective, I go, why would you want to like evangelical Christian? Like, why? Why would like
Mm-hmm.
I could see you being like Mike Pence, yeah, like that guy fits the bill. But I'm like, Trump,
Mm-hmm.
he didn't fit the bill. But the problem isn't going to be solved ultimately if we don't. I think in the long run, we have to have some sort of understanding. And that's not an allowance or a tolerance of behavior at all. But like even just a moment of like, can I understand that somebody's scared?
Right.
Just that level, I can acknowledge that and be, rather than being like, well, screw you.
Mm-hmm.
Right now, I mean, like I don't give a shit. There's a lot of things where like legally, I'm just like, I don't care. Send your ass to jail. Like I don't have a care of it. Like, no, let me talk to you first. Let me understand your fears. Like, no, it's like get your ass in the jail. Like
Right.
you're acting in ways that are completely unacceptable in this kind of society. But I think that's so easy to lose that like wondering, yeah, why are people feeling fear? And integral really is actually like not just a cerebral exercise. This is really a model that can help us provide some understanding of like value structures, right? Which we talk about a lot. If traditional value structures that feel threatened might then look at like a progressive candidate and be like, oof, that's going to get rid of my traditional values. But this other person says they're going to keep my traditional values, even if they're full of shit, you know, I can make sense of it. But
Right.
like we get down to the fear of like, well, and even be able to ask that, like, well, yeah, what's up for you? Like, let me really curiously ask you, why are you doing that? But we
Mm-hmm.
can do that for ourselves. So
Yep.
we've been talking about looking outwards, but we got to be able to do that with ourselves first, in my opinion. So I have to be like, why am I scared? Why am I scared of this happening? And may turn out to be like, there's a real fear. There's a fear of our social systems collapsing, you
That's right.
know,
Yep.
or continued climate change, and impacting us.
Mm-hmm.
So anyways, we might all have real fears, but we got to start with that. That's my opinion anyways.
I no, I love it. And I love actually that invitation to be a little bit vulnerable and actually start the conversation by presencing the fact that like, hey guys, I'm feeling some fear now. You know what I mean? It's amazing how that actually really does kind of tenderize the conversation and invites genuine empathy and compassion and perspective taking in a
Yep.
way that sort of when we try to bypass our fear, right? When we're not
Yeah.
comfortable with fear, when we don't have the tools that are at our disposal to actually inhabit this fear, right? And
Yeah.
actually sort of like let it be present and let ourselves be present with it, right? Instead, we just push it away. And that's when it turns into all sorts of, I mean, it can turn into violence really easily. It can turn into sort of this self-righteous kind of bludgeoning of our own kind of
Yeah.
views and values and ideals onto other people, or
Yeah.
there's any number of ways that we use to compensate for this fear response, which again, that fear response might be coming from a fully appropriate, authentic kind of place within you. I mean, that
Yeah.
fear is
Right.
is real because you have some skin in the game, right? And you have a
Yeah.
chance of suffering because of what's happening around you that is not in your control, and that
Yeah.
generates real fear. And it is, I think, just as sort of foolhardy for us to try to deny that fear or push it away as it is for us to allow ourselves to be utterly and totally consumed by it. It actually reminds me,
Yeah.
one of my favorite shows that I've talked about a few times here is Doctor Who. Doctor Who's such an amazing show. I mean, it's, you know, it's just especially for integralists. I mean, here's a story
Mm.
of a time traveling pacifist that's, you know, going through time and saving the world with a spoon in a sonic screwdriver. It's, you know, it's just it's a delightful show. But there's one episode in particular called Fear, and I love this monologue that the Doctor, played by Peter Capaldi, gives, where he's basically saying fear is a superpower. Like right now, you feel scared, and that is making you more alert. You can run faster.
Mm.
You can, you know, you're
Mm.
stronger, and you are, you know what I mean? So
Mhm.
there's a clarity that comes with these sort of hyper aroused states.
Mhm.
Now, we probably don't want to make important life decisions from those states, but
Right.
but those states can be very, very informative, right? I mean, it's those are the states that get us out of danger, right? Those are the states that make us, you know, super aware of what's happening in our environment so that we can, you know,
Yeah.
survive whatever
Yeah.
it is about
Yeah.
to, you know, come in our
Mm.
path.
Mm. That's a beautiful point. Yeah. It reminds me of, classic tantric practice in Vajrayana and Tibetan Buddhism, where you're looking at the energy of an emotion. So, like, every emotion has an energy to it. And so, rather than in the like Hinayana version of Buddhism, emotions are meant to be squashed or emphasized. So, like, anger, get rid of it. Kindness, keep that. It's more managed. But in
Mm-hmm.
Vajrayana, we say, well, what's the energy behind it? So, like, it can have an unenlightened form and unenlightened form. So we can use the energy to transform that into something useful. So, like, pointing out, like, what energy is coming along with fear, where there can be clarity, right? There can be like alertness. So
Mm-hmm.
then how can we transform that alertness into something meaningful and useful? But in order to do that, we still have to clarify what's going on in the first place, which is where we started, of being like, we have to be able to know that we're in a fear state and to recognize that in ourselves, because otherwise we go to, like, the car going to the red in the RPMs, we burn out our engine,
Mm-hmm.
and that's where we have, vomiting on Facebook or freaking out or collapsing, things like that. But there's potential there. So we don't necessarily have to, get rid of the fear. There could be something, again, good reason why we have the fear,
That's right.
and good energy in it to transform it. And, one thing I want to bring up too here, I kind of hit on this earlier, but in being vulnerable, we have to know this is, we'll just go back to the classic, what's been up in our culture quite a lot. And it's been interesting to see different reactions in the integral community around these conversations. But when the difference between Black Lives Matter and All Lives Matter, and then there's been a recent image that showed up. I don't know if it's a real image of a boat with a bunch of Trump flags and things like that, and they're like overwhelmed by waves, and it kind of looks like a real thing, but I don't know. But it's making a point, like, this boat looks like it's, you know, getting capsized or
Capsized,
whatever.
yeah.
And then there's somebody on the shore saying, all boats matter. And, it makes a point. And here it's not about an agenda. Like, if somebody's hearing this, be like, oh, agenda, and I don't want to listen to what he's saying right now. It's not about that. It's just like, you see someone in a boat getting capsized, you go, gosh, there's something that rises up in me that says, help.
We should
I will
help
help that person.
that individual person. Yeah.
That's it. That's all it is there. It's not about, like, any political agenda up front. It turns into a political agenda because instead of a boat, it is made up of systems. So, like, if there's a wave generator that's generating waves for particular boats, and the boats are getting capsized, well, we're gonna have to solve that problem in order to solve the boats, okay? But, like, we gotta keep in mind here that some people have too much vulnerability, like, they're steeped in vulnerability every single day, and
Mm-hmm.
they don't have anything more to give, and that can come in all kinds of different forms. It doesn't, whether it's in racial groups, or whether it's like, I think about you and I, like, in our different situations here. You have a daughter who has a condition with her immune system, right, that you have to
Mm-hmm.
manage.
Yep.
That puts you in a much more vulnerable state to, like, of alertness
Mm-hmm.
and of fear. you know I have a stepdaughter, but she doesn't have that immune system
Mm-hmm.
issue. So that, even that's a little bit different, right?
Yep.
About how you and I are going to feel and our abilities. So the more the more capacity we have to, like, notice our fear, it feels like there's a little bit more responsibility to do so. Like, if I have the ability to do that, like, let me do that, so that maybe I can help other people do that as well. You know, a little. So let's. it's always important to me to differentiate that. And I also am aware that how sometimes in every community, how that might sound and what the reaction might be to it. But I'm just like, you know what? It's a practical issue.
Yeah.
So let's look at our fear for a practical sake. But I also want to know that some people are listening and you might be listening and say like, I'm up to my fucking eyeballs in fear and vulnerability. Now I'm saying I hear you, and you know what? You're doing your best. And if all you got is to be able to just sit here and take a breath, then you do that.
Right.
Don't feel like you have to do anything else more. But for those of us who have more ability to do it, I lean into it more and say, come on, let's step up and do our work.
Yep.
Yeah.
Well, and it becomes a question of, again, because obviously these fears are going to arise. So that, you just mentioned my situation. That is an ongoing source of fear.
Yeah.
And that gets compounded when I see the numbers, oh my God, we're almost at 200,000 right now. When you know what I mean? And there's so many unknowns that feed into that fear. And then it compounds because then I'm not just afraid of the pandemic. I'm afraid of like people who pretend the pandemic's not real, and the people who just, who say things like your health is not my responsibility, all of this kind of compounds. Right. And I find myself sort of in this state of terror. Yeah. But what I notice is that when I'm in that state, there are sort of, I have decisions. I still have choices when I'm in that state, and certain choices allow me to kind of rise up out of it or just get on top of it. You know what I mean? It's still there, but it's not, I'm not completely surrounded by it. And another set of choices brings me kind of lower. I sink into it and I kind of wallow, and it creates paralysis. So for example, if I wanted to wallow around these fears, it would be like, oh my God, I'm going to, put our entire house in a bubble, and we're not going to see any other people for 3 years. And we're not, you know what I mean? And, and we can sort of just kind of gum up our works and paralyze ourselves by doing that. And instead I say, I want to use this fear as an opportunity. I want to use this fear as an opportunity to both teach my daughter the kinds of sort of, how to be careful and anti-fragile at the same time with her own health. I want to use it as an opportunity to have these conversations exactly like these in public spaces, so that we can hopefully generate some new influence and maybe even change a couple minds as we go, and sort of really reaffirm how important it is to have just some basic compassion and empathy and capacity to take each other's perspective. I mean, all of this kind of, and most importantly, it animates what I'm going to do at the ballot in November. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
All of this fear makes me want to get more active, more engaged, and exercise my civic responsibilities.
It's clarifying in that sense. Yeah. And I was thinking about that last night. Differences I've noticed in this election, I've taken note as kind of like embodiments and reflections of where we're at. But even though I've noticed in the last month, things more stoked up, like the rhetoric, a little more stoked up in the last month, I really do notice a lot less of it, at least amongst my progressive network. Like compared to like 4 years ago, like there seems to be something a little bit like cut through, like the very real pain and very real fear of what many of us are experiencing, especially this year. There's something clarifying about it. There's something that just cuts through. It's because it's painful. It's just like you're getting to a point of exhaustion where you're like, well, I got nothing left except for to do what's most important. And again, we don't want to do that. It's not this like no pain, no gain approach. It's like, no, we would all wish this away if we could, right? Like in a heartbeat, like get rid of pandemic. So I'm just reading this comment here. It's clarifying. So I think we can use that. But again, we have to do that chain of like first identifying and being with our experience in its raw form for however it is. And then seeing from there, okay, what do I need to do if I need to respond like you're doing in your life? Like I know you mentioned like you didn't do takeout for quite a long time, probably longer than most people do. That was your decision to be like, that's going to be my safest decision for our situation. But then you're also making decisions about like, how do you want to respond and be resilient and through this as well? So these are all great things. And then as we're going to, especially in our next episode, we're going to talk about more action oriented, like what we're going to do in the ballot.
Right. Yeah.
So
Tom just sent in a comment, and Tom, I'll invite you on later to sort of, talk about what you mean by this, but he says, this is way too politically correct. There's more at stake than changing perspectives. If you like, you can raise your hand later and we'll bring you on and you can tell us more what you mean by that. I mean, I certainly agree that there's a lot at stake right now. And I would say that there's a lot of legitimate reasons for people to be fearful. And I think that, the major point we're trying to make here is don't let that be the end of it. Let that be the beginning of the story and not the end.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Don't let that sort of fear trap you, paralyze you, and prevent you from doing what needs to be done and prevent you from showing up in all the ways you need to show up in order to create an effect. So we can definitely have that conversation as we go. Because I also want to be sensitive to the fact that this, we don't really do a partisan show here. We make our own kind of political views known for sure.
Yeah.
But this space, this show is open to anyone, regardless of your political views. And so I just want to, make sure we make that explicit. That said, I think this is a once in a lifetime election, and probably the most important election of our lifetimes, not to just sort of repeat the memes that are already out there. But it does seem to have that much kind of gravity behind it. So we're definitely not minimizing anything.
Oh, I mean, I'll speak for myself. Like, I don't like, well, I think might be true for you too. Like, I don't think it's like literally open to everybody. I mean, like if somebody, like there's certain political views that like, are we going to have a QAnon person on the show?
Right.
I'm not
No,
interested. I'm
that's
not going to
true.
do that. I'm not going to do that. So if Corey, you want to do that, you can do that. But no, I don't give a shit. That's what I'm saying. It's like, this is me, but like, this is like, this isn't a patting myself on the back, but like, it's also encouraging other people. I'm self-possessed, so I can like inhabit my experiences, but also say I'm one person. And this is partly why, like, I'm like, I don't want to be in charge of what should be done. I'm like, this is one person. I want to be part of a larger group where we can think together and put these perspectives together, which is why we have these shows and why you have so many people you're talking to. But yeah, the more that the stakes get higher and the more danger there is, the less room there is for harmful orientations, you know what I mean?
Right.
And of course, where we draw those lines are going to be different, and I totally understand that. But no, this isn't like a wide open thing, for me, which is sort of an interesting thing. Like the comment of politically correct is usually associated with the green meme, and a green meme is usually associated with all perspectives are invited, even though they're really not. Hidden intolerance of it. And so I'm definitely not in favor of that. I'm just like, no, like
it can either mean you're being too green or not green enough.
yeah, whatever.
So we'll have to get some clarification on that.
No, this is as I've emphasized here, this is very much about it's very, very practical. So like if each of us as individuals, we can look into our own fear and really directly, rawly, and be honest with ourselves, then that's all there is to it. It's like what you discover, like for example, Corey or me, what we discover in our own experience of that, I don't know. I can't say what it's going to be. I can't say when or why you're going to be fearful, because fear can arise with response to anything. Right. That's the raw experience of it. And then as far as what you do with that and whether it impacts your own life or other people, that starts becoming another story. So it could just impact you, but likely not. Likely, usually how we deal with our fear is going to impact other people. And that's where we have to be discerning. We have to be both curious and discerning. And at a certain point, it's just about actions. Like there's just a certain point where the discussion ends too. So that's in terms of the action. This episode, we're leaning a little bit more towards like inhabiting the fear, because otherwise we can't really do the other things. Like if we bypass the fear and we don't, whatever the fear is, and again, it could be very valid. So even if like a vow of saying like, oh, this is way too politically correct, feel into there's going to be a fear there of saying like, well, that it's way too politically correct. That means there's some negative consequence of it. And what's that negative consequence and how do I feel about that? Feel into that first. And then if it feels very valid in the end, okay, great.
Right.
But
right.
For
otherwise,
all of us,
otherwise it turns right into shadow, right? Otherwise, it's like, okay, well, I have these fears. These fears are real, by the way. Your fears aren't as real as my fears, and therefore, I feel a certain kind of almost self-righteousness. I'm not, Tom. I'm not clear. I'm not.
It was just in
general.
Saying
this is a pattern that we often see, where you're not taking my fears seriously, and so therefore, I have a sense of sort of self-righteousness and a sense of superiority and all that. Yeah. And I think what we're trying to do here is, again, just kind of cultivate this ability to just sit with it and sit in it and let it pass through you before responding. I mean, respond in that if that's, if that's your life and death kind of moment and you need to get out of traffic and, fear is telling you to move.
Exactly.
Move,
we got to have the discernment of like the situation and like what we're going to, how immediate of a response we need. And so these are complicated factors in there, but like the practice is fairly simple. So balance is one, like a radical acceptance, because
Yeah.
that's part of life, because reality is how reality is at any given moment. And we may not like it that way, even if it's very valid to not like it that way. But just like for people who don't want Donald Trump president, it's like, well, tough shit. Donald Trump is president.
Yeah.
That's how it is. And so we got to sit in that. And I think that's been a big lesson for a lot of progressives, is to be like, we're going to sit in it. Like,
Right.
no matter how much we go, "Oh," it's like, well, he's president.
Yep.
He's president
Well,
until he's not.
I think you made a great change that there's been a sort of a change in tone from
Yeah.
2016 till now,
Yeah.
just in terms of the types of fear that we're
Yeah.
seeing. And, you know, and I'll speak, you know, to
Yeah.
the progressives that sort of I've been in connection with. It's
Yeah.
interesting because the fear is still there, but it's in 2016, it was a fear of the unknown, right? It's like, I don't know what this guy's capable of. I certainly know he's not qualified, but Jesus, I don't know what's going to come of a Trump presidency. So there
Yeah.
was this, you know, this really big sort of fear of the unknown. Now, I think everyone, no matter where you, I mean, that's why there's fewer undecideds in this election cycle than in previous election cycles. We know what to expect. We know what we're going to get. We know what to expect from 4 more years of Trump. We more or less know what to expect from a Biden presidency. So there's not a whole lot of room for this kind of like unknown kind of projection game that we often fall into with politics. We know what this is going to look like, right?
Yeah.
And that generates a different kind of fear, and that can generate even a different kind of self-righteousness, right? Sort of alongside that, you know, because the people who are sitting on the right, who might be watching us right now, are looking at, you know, the what is it, 7% or so of protests that have gone violent, and 7% is too high, right? 7%. We would ideally like to see much less violence in our protest movements, and we've talked about this in previous shows. We can try to understand the violence without actually sort of condoning it or supporting it. I certainly understand why there is violence. I can certainly understand why some degree of violence is probably inevitable when it comes to getting the gears of social transformation actually moving again. And as I said before, we can probably gauge the health of a society on how much violence is actually required in order to get those gears moving.
Yeah, totally. And so getting into the response realm about like protests, for example, that's where it's like, you know, the conversation can get very complicated and nuanced, and where like I will feel like less passionate as an individual to say like, oh, it should be like no violence or some violence, or, you know, like I can understand a little bit more, but like having the conversation is really important, not just to have a conversation, but like, you know, because yeah. So for example, there's been different conversations, like I can make sense out of people who have experienced a lot of violence being pissed off and getting violent. You know, it's just sort of like, if you punch somebody and you keep punching them, they might punch you back. You know what I mean? And I'm just like, I can understand that. At the same time, I can understand the perspective of like, well, if we're trying to protest against violence and we do it with violence, this is what civil rights activists really dealt with in you know, in the civil rights movements, that it's like, well, how should we approach this thing? And like, and they stuck a lot of times more with nonviolent protesting. But again, for the purpose of this show, I'm like, you know, I understand, as if we can stay rooted in our experience and our personal and collective experience, and to be honest about what's arising, I trust a lot more what our response is going to be. And I have less personal interest in it being perfect, or like we just know, oh, that we're doing the exact right thing. But the more that we get detached from our embodied experience and in that vulnerability of sharing that with each other, the harder it gets, you know?
Yeah.
So,
Well,
go ahead.
it's another piece that I see, Ryan, is that oftentimes it feels like the language of waking up can sometimes be misapplied to the process of growing up, right? And what I
Yeah,
mean
for
by that
sure.
is oftentimes these waking up traditions, and pretty much across the traditions, there's a very, very common refrain, which is something like, the opposite of love is not hate, it's fear. Right. So right there, we have a polarity. We have love on one side, we have
Yeah.
fear on the other. And which means if you're feeling fear, you're feeling anti-love. Right. And
Yeah.
I think that is absolutely true in that absolute sense. And I think part of our spiritual training is coming into alignment with that realization that there is the only space for fear is wherever I feel space for other. And as long as I have some aspect of my experience that is other to me, I will feel fear. And therefore, my spiritual impulse is to dissolve those boundaries as much as I possibly can. But guess what? You still have this growing up process that's taking place alongside that, sort of that slide towards enlightenment. And when
Yeah.
it comes to that growing up process, we still have an ego. We still have an identity. And that identity is still
Yeah.
going through these multiple stages of development. And guess what? You're going to find fear at every single one of those stages.
Yeah.
Every single
Yeah.
one of those stages.
Yeah.
So what we're doing is we're developing several things simultaneously. We're developing a certain mindset or a certain way of relating to our absolute self, our biggest, widest, deepest self, that helps us manage that fear, that helps us remember that when we're feeling fear, there's an other. And if we can bring that other into this side of our face, chances are that fear will start to lessen, will start to diminish.
Yeah.
And at the same time, if someone has a gun to your head, how much good is it going to do to you, for you to become one with the person who's about to shoot you in the face?
Yeah. Yeah. There's a lot there for sure. That was a great conclusion to it. But yeah, whenever there's another, well, the growing up process points to how the concept of self and other evolves and changes. So whereas in the waking up context, it's pretty neutral. It's just like self and other, doesn't matter the version of self or version of other. It's always like transcending that. But we don't interact that way to day life, because this conglomeration of processes and interconnectedness continues functioning as what we call self. And it's like, here I am, and we generally keep rolling with it. I have my likes, my dislikes, my preferences, and everybody's, if we're being honest, they are interacting that way. It's not just like, because if you're really saying that you are living completely always from the space of like complete transcendence, I tend to lean a little bit more bullshit. I've experienced people who feel very emptied out, like is from an awakening perspective. Like I can experience that in them. I'm like, wow, they are really emptied out in terms of ego. But still, I don't know. I don't never really met anybody where I'm just like, yeah, they don't have preferences and their self and other kind of thing. But their ability to relate to that can radically change. So we can radically change how sticky the self other kind of experience is, but it's not going to change the fact that non-dual is always said not one, not two, but there's this interconnected existence. So
Right.
fear will be there,
Yeah.
and unless we're going to like just try to numb out, like, and not pretend there's a gun there, right, for example, then we're going to do something. There's meaning to do it.
Right.
Meaning arises. Yeah.
Right.
Also, there's comments in YouTube, and there was a comment that we don't pay attention to, that we're not going to respond to YouTube comments, which isn't true. We read the comments in YouTube.
We're proving you wrong in real time, YouTube.
We always are looking there. We just bounce back and forth between Zoom and YouTube. It's not really an easy way for us to have both screens up. But
well, let's see. Barb here says that thanks so much for the topic. You're welcome, Barb. Fear, though valid, compromises the immune system and thought processes. We want to notice or witness our fears so that we can reframe and transform them. I think that's well said, Barb.
Yeah, and it's always true. I mean, like maintaining a state of fear is going to have an effect on our nervous system, and a lot of different modalities and professionals speak to that. So it's like, it's definitely been really established that if a person lives in fear, the immune system is going to be compromised. Decision making is more difficult. Compromises our brain's capacity to really process information, to contemplate it. And it seems like, again, well, and also the word fear could comprise of different other synonyms that maybe mean a little different things, but there is some inherent mechanism in us that helps us track, like you said, and from an evolutionary standpoint, safe, good, bad, harmful.
Yep.
Like that's there, because if we didn't have that, we would just touch hot frying pans and fall off bridges and stuff, because we just don't have any concept of those being potentially harmful. But we want as much as possible not to be living in the state of like being surrounded by hot frying pans,
Right.
like it's gonna brutally stress us out. Like if we can't feel like we can walk,
Well, it's
And
funny because both cortisol and adrenaline are basically like self-dosing poisons that our
yeah,
body puts into its own system when we need to move, when we need to act, when we need to
yeah,
get out of harm's way, and etc. And yes, absolutely. If you are stuck in that state, if you're stuck in an emotional state of fearfulness, that cortisol, that all of
yeah.
that is going to severely impact your health. And in
And
fact,
by
that's sort of the litmus test right there, right? Is like how stuck am I? Am I able to let this fear kind of come up and be present and then pass through,
yeah, yeah.
right? Or am I getting kind of hooked into it and I find myself returning to it like a well over and over again, even to the point
Hmm.
where sometimes there's a piece of our identity that becomes comfortable there. It becomes
Hmm.
that we wear that fear almost like a blanket. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
We're
yeah.
using sort of a smaller fear maybe to protect ourselves from a larger fear.
It's complicated. Yeah. And I'm happy we've done previous episodes, inhabiting your wound, inhabiting your shadow, and all these things to help us practice, because this is where sometimes like contemplative practice can be helpful to give us more space, more room to deal with fear, our abilities to let go, which is in reason why a lot of research on various meditation techniques speak to the ability to regulate the nervous system, to be able to get ourselves out of that fear cycle, because once it's really ramped up, it's biologically very difficult to get out of that. Like if we experience anxiety states, they can reach a point of like where we're not going to be able to process anything mentally, like, oh, let me just contemplate that. No, it's just the whole system is like alarms, right?
Yep.
So we do have to find, and we have to find ways to manage that, and then to cultivate a bigger base of foundations so that way it's less likely to happen. But then we have to deal with our patterns of existence, which we talked about with, shadows and wounds, that we could have patterns of fearful responses. That's something that we carry around, not just in a moment like, oh, a car's coming. It's just a fearful moment that instant, versus like fear of intimacy due to trauma that we've experienced. Like
Mm-hmm.
that's something that we're gonna have to cultivate and work with over time. um, so all of this points to just again being curious about like, how is this fear serving me or not serving me? Or really, a lot of us these days are talking about us,
Mm-hmm.
and everybody's talking about us. Even if people are like from integral mind point have a reaction to the collective orientation of like green, the comments are still oriented about us, of what we should or shouldn't do.
Mm-hmm.
So one way or another, unless you're just an egocentric, narcissistic, egomaniac, you're caring about an us at the same time as your individual self.
Yep.
Um, so
Well,
a lot of this is
another,
slowing down. A lot of it is about slowing down because fear is a speeding up.
yeah. Well, and this brings us to sort of, what are some practices that we can suggest for people? Maybe practices that we do
Yeah.
ourselves and practices that we can recommend for other people who feel
Yeah.
themselves kind of getting caught in this.
So I kind of hinted at this before, but it's helpful, at least for me, to think of different levels of fear, kind of alongside of different levels of anxiety, because usually with fear, there's anxiety. It is like a more high speed response versus a depressive response,
Mm-hmm.
where it's more hopeless and we let go and numb out. But fear is like ramping up. And so we can have different levels of that happening. And, as mentioned in the YouTube comment from Barbara about our biological system,
Mm-hmm.
the more it gets ramped up, the more that our response has to be a somatic one. But so we have to know where are we at in that fear anxiety cycle, and then what kind of tools will be good. So now before it, I work with people too in the realm of meditation and awakening, also working with how anxiety shows up, like social anxiety or things even like obsessive compulsive disorder. I'm not treating those per se, but I am working in harmony with those things. So I'm familiar with it. And also I struggle with social anxiety for many, many years of most of my, all my childhood and a good chunk of my adult life. So I'm familiar with this. So prior to anxiety, we can work with establishing that base, our ability to enter into a space that feels free of fear. Can I touch into something that feels I can rest into, like in a good environment? Like, okay, I'm in on my meditation cushion, nothing is stressful is happening. I can sit here and cultivate the ability to regulate, my system, and then let go into something that feels spacious and still and just a simple presence. So we can do that through a lot of different meditation practices. So we're going to list these out, but any sort of settling practice, that allows us
Mm-hmm.
to settle downward, that allows the mind to calm down a little bit, that helps us to get that space. So that way we can then look back at the content of our experience with more space and more freshness in our consciousness. But then as fear gets ramped up, we have to start implementing antidotes,
Right. Yep. No,
Um,
and that was great, Ryan, because especially because it's which is a theme of this show. It's practices that engage more of us than just sort of neck up, right?
yeah.
So Keith and I'm going to be publishing it soon. Last month did a wonderful talk about breathing practices
Oh, great.
and how we use breathing to sort of reset our system, to reset our nervous system, and to
Oh, that's
sort of
great.
bring down these hyper arousal states so that we can find just a little bit more clarity and a little bit more responsiveness there.
Yeah,
That's
that's breathing is
that's another
great.
huge one.
Hmm.
Actually using your breath and breathing through the fear has been tremendously helpful for me. Uh, Basic gratitude practice. I
Mm.
mean, this
Yeah.
has gotten me through this year, right?
Yep.
Because my experience of 2020 has
Yep.
been, when I look outside of my window, it's terrifying. I mean, it's terrifying. I'm seeing pandemics, and I'm seeing
Mm.
massive fires in Australia from climate change, and I'm seeing 200,000 dead Americans and way more dead around the world, and I'm
Mm.
seeing so much. I'm seeing the destruction of these institutions, of the post office. I'm seeing the
Mm.
delegitimization of my country on the world stage. I'm seeing all of these things that
Yeah.
out there, when I look out there, it kind of feels like the sky is falling just a little bit,
Hmm.
or at least it's a
Hmm.
little more rickety than it was a couple years ago,
Hmm. Hmm.
But when I take inventory of my personal life, of everything that's happened inside these walls, I have had an amazing year. It's been a really tremendously positive year in terms of my own growth, my own happiness, my own fulfillment, my relationship with my family. You know, I'm able to see these things that have generated fear for me on the path, and I can kind of, just by taking inventory and doing just a little bit of basic gratitude, it's not hard for me to transmute those and see the
Yeah.
beauty of this. I had all sorts of fears about, oh, my daughter's not going to be able to go to school for a while. All right, we're going to have to keep her. We're going to have to do the at home learning for a while. And my fear is
Yeah.
that this is going to
Right.
interrupt all this, this kind of socialization
Mm.
that she needs, and all just sort of the normalcy that every kid kind of
Yeah.
seeks.
Yeah. Yeah.
But then I'm able to transmute that into these opportunities. Like, wow, I have this opportunity to be way more part of my daughter's education
Mm.
than my parents ever were for me, or even had the opportunity to be
Yeah.
with me. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? I had the
Yeah.
opportunity to
Yeah.
spend more time with her and just to be in her presence, and to so it's all of these kind of challenges
Yeah.
that, you can flip over these rocks and you can see
Uh-huh.
how it turns into this trail leading you towards
Yeah.
your own fulfillment. And that helps me when
Hold
I
on.
when I look out the window again and I look at, and I see the sky falling. I feel a
That's
little
really
bit
good.
more. Yeah.
It's a really good practice. And so there's a gratitude journal that I've used in the past, and I think you just Google gratitude journal. It's kind of like a white beige book, and it basically in the morning you'll write down 3 things you're grateful for, and at the end of the day, 3 things that happened that were good. And at first, it can sound super like soft and self-helpy, but it's actually it really is a genuinely good practice, especially when things are difficult. And the thing is, it's not a guilt trip. It's like, well, you should feel grateful for something. Well, why are you not feeling grateful? It's not about a guilt trip. It's just like anything that you're grateful for. And it could be a practice of finding even small things, like I'm grateful I have my sense faculties,
Right.
like how wonderful that I can see you, Corey, and that I can talk. This is really wonderful. It's a magical experience to do that. So it could be anything, but it's really powerful. And it changes the direction. So we're not looking at fear. We're looking at something that we find really meaningful and that we're grateful for. And, uh, and we get to soak in a different quality than fear. Yeah, sure.
That's right. Keep going.
Um,
I'm afraid my laptop's about to die, so I have to
oh,
plug it in. So
I'm grateful that you have a plug and
yeah.
electricity, so that way we can keep the show going. What else she said? Yeah, but there's probably a lot of different. Oh, there is some science research, and I don't remember this. My partner Alyssa, who's a psychologist, probably knows some of the research around this, and also our good friend Will Hamilton, who's a psychologist and also fellow Buddhist teacher. I remember one time he was sharing something about that there's a research that like there's a certain number, like maybe 3 is the magical number that they've seen. If you practice that much, that's you have to do at least a certain number to get the benefit. And like too many numbers, the benefit drops off. So like there's a really interesting research around seeing the results of gratitude practice that it actually has science behind it.
Yep. And it's not about, again, I think you mean it's not about using gratitude to sort of drown out your fears. You know what I mean? You're not replacing fear with gratitude. You're not, again, we're not bypassing here. The goal here is not to skip over these things and empty yourself out into something that feels more comfortable and feel good. Sometimes you need to be uncomfortable, right?
Yeah.
I mean, sometimes our growth actually requires some discomfort. And I would say, you know, these days we sort of have an overabundance of comfort that prevents us from dealing with our fears head on and from taking the actions required to actually bring us out of whatever situation we're in, whatever conditions we're in that's generating the fear in the first place. We can kind of keep ourselves there because we have just enough creature comforts to kind of insulate ourselves from the worst of it. So we acclimate to the fear. Right?
Yeah. Yep.
And that creates its own paralysis.
Totally. Yeah. Yep. So yeah, gratitude. I'm glad you brought that one up. That's a really good one. Then some other things with fear when it's ramping up more and more, and it's becoming more and more a physical experience, right? And our mental faculties are getting compromised. There's less space for that. There are different suggestions out there, and encourage people to go research it. And especially if you're dealing with something more intense, find somebody who's a professional to work with. We're just talking amongst ourselves here without providing direct mental health advice. But physical energy, like for example, anxiety, fears ramping up, jumping jacks, running, push-ups, whatever. It helps to move the energy and kind of exhaust out the franticness. Even more beyond that, touching cold things, temperature can be really useful. A cold compress, and some of these things sound like we may think it's so funny. I think we're so like frogs and whatever in the boiling water, which I think I read the other day that's a misnomer.
Like, yeah, we talked about that.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, you were talking about that. But anyways,
it's only frogs who had their brains surgically removed, which still makes it a very apt metaphor for what
we're still going to use it, right? Yeah, we're still going to use it. That we may not think that we're better off than what we actually are. Like our systems are pumping more cortisol than what we're really aware of day to day. I'm convinced of that. Like for us, all of us to get our cortisol levels back to normal we would need a month off probably. Like we're just all overstressed and anxious. And so some of these things may sound silly, but it's like, you know what? Hey, if you got a little cold ice pack in your fridge, maybe one day you're feeling ramped up, just see what it feels like. Just put it on your forehead, see if it feels good. And again, these are levels of intensity of spectrum. And that's the most important thing for me, is to just notice that wherever you're at and whatever you might need. And you might need to creatively try things out, investigate. Usually with anything emotional, it's good to work with somebody else, right? Whether it's somebody you trust as a friend, loved one, or a professional of one flavor or another, to like help you, who can hold space, a point of contact for you. Because when we're working with fear, it's hard by ourselves. That's why so often if we're freaking out, it's always good having a friend or loved one come over and pat us on the head, give us a hug, because it's something that can feel like a vortex, like we just get sucked into it and it's hard to find our way out sometimes.
Yep. Yeah, for me, in those lines, and sort of the self-soothing, right? Developing the skills to self-soothe. A big one for me has been, I've talked about it before, ASMR. Our video seems kind of funky right now.
I don't know why.
Let's give this a second to catch up. But as an example of, there are interventions in all 4 quadrants for this problem. We've talked about basic mindfulness, meditation, gratefulness in the upper left. We've talked about some of these kind of physical exertion in the upper right, even using things like cold compresses. In the lower left, we have simply make yourself vulnerable. Share fears with someone. Find someone, whether it's your partner, your community, your sangha. what have you. Find someone you can share authentically,
Mm.
uh, your fears with. And then in the lower right, it's find skillful action in the collective. So if
Yeah.
you have fears that are being generated from sort of the political sphere, find actions in the political sphere that will at least make you feel like you're looking at the problem and you're doing something about it and you're engaging it more directly.
Yeah, that's great. I'm glad we brought the quadrants, because oftentimes we'll lean a little bit more individual, practice oriented, when dealing with stuff in the upper left. Like, so the experience of fear is often internal subjective experience, and then also with a corresponding exterior biological experience that we talked about. But obviously, as we also talked about, some of that fear arising can be arising for any number of reasons in all the quadrants, right? Fear of economic system, and one's economic situation, fear of intercultural experiences like racism, things like that. So it's important to also look at those collective solutions that might help support the experience of fear. And like, so practice community. So not just finding someone in a community, but finding a community. So like right here, we're talking, we're part of the community. There's you audience members are listening, this community, so we can find solace and support in our communities to where we feel we can let go because we're not in it alone. So finding communities that you feel comfortable with, that you trust, can be incredibly important. And we've found that this year with our Buddhist Geeks training groups, that even just having that on the schedule every week for 90 minutes where we show up together and we practice together with 10, 12 other people, that in itself can feel grounding, um, and healing in a certain way, just by meeting and being a part of something.
Yeah.
So I think that's important as well.
What a coincidence, Ryan, because we just so happen
Yeah.
to have this new practice platform that we're bringing online right now to do exactly that. And I tell you, this delayed video is driving me nuts.
I
right
know.
now.
I always hate that kind of thing. I don't know why it's happening.
Oh, this is the worst. I
It
think
usually
it's
doesn't
been
happen
in
with
the field.
Zoom.
Yeah. Well, we're getting a little bit of snow right now. It dropped 70 degrees in 24 hours here in Colorado. So maybe there's something weird going on. But just to plug this real quick. So again, one of the best ways is to do what Ryan says, to find your community. And guess what? If you're watching this right now, you've probably already found your community and you're just looking for ways to engage more deeply with each other. And as it happens, we are now bringing online for Integral Life members this practice platform that's going to offer multiple real-time practices every week. I think this week we're doing 3 practices. We're going to continue ramping this up. Ideally, before too long, we're going to have several practices available per day that you can just kind of drop into in real time. That real time piece is so important because so much of the integral community has been offloaded to platforms like Facebook, which obviously is time shifted, right? Or YouTube videos where you might watch this conversation a month from now, and it's hard to join a conversation that took place 30 days ago. These practice communities are your opportunity to drop in real time, share an experience with other people like you. And guess what? One of the best parts is you're not going to hear much about quadrants or levels or lines or any of that stuff. I mean, this is about cultivating a direct integral experience right now, that we can use to help sort of leverage each other's growth.
Yeah.
And I'm excited for that. It feels like an integral
It's
renaissance in a certain way.
Yeah, it's super super great. Yeah, and man, the whole delay in the video is like so bizarre.
It's
Like,
killing me, I know.
because I'm like, wait a minute, is Corey still talking? No, I don't know. Yeah, so I'll be leading one next week. I don't think there's been a formal announcement, but it appears to be that I will be leading one of those sessions next Wednesday at 3 p.m. Eastern. So September 16th.
Yeah, so I definitely invite everyone to check it out. Yeah, this video glitch is killing me, buddy.
This is rare with Zoom.
I know.
Are your ladies doing some serious gaming downloading happening?
Dude, you just so it's right now. I think my wife is in a meeting on Zoom, and I think my daughter is in a classroom on Zoom.
A lot of video stuff happening.
A lot of video stuff happening.
Well, we can make it. We can make it. Inhabit our fear of the video lag. Yeah, Corey, and if you mind me mentioning the integral Dharma training,
Please.
So that's another opportunity for group practice. So Buddhist Geeks, I've mentioned before that we do these training groups, which are offered quarterly, and they last 10 weeks. They're small groups, up to 12 people, that meet 90 minutes a week. We have responsive meditation training, which the theme changes depending on the group. We always survey people beforehand using our responsive meditation guide as a reference point. Like, what kind of practice are you into? What's up in your life right now? And we formulate the practice focus. But Integral Dharma, we offered at the beginning of the year for the first time, which explicitly had an integral focus in the practice. The integral model drove the practice and the types of practices. So very much still meditation based, but emphasizing those 4 ups, waking up, cleaning up, growing up, and showing up, and even more. And we're going to be offering that again, finally, starting October 12th in this final quarter. And so I'm going to be leading that. And then along with fellow Buddhist Geeks teacher, Lisa Sherman. So anyways, I invite you all to check that out. Is it integraldharma.training, I believe is our domain name. Yeah, so would love, of course, integral peeps from this community to check that out. And we have intro sessions where you can meet with one of us to learn more about the training and see if it's a good fit or not. But we offer it all through transparent generosity, so donation based. So it's hopefully doable for people, and regardless of the situation, especially in a pandemic,
Mm-hmm.
But we found, again, any practice opportunities like right now, especially this year, and especially if we're all at home a lot more, it's been really comforting and supportive and also transformative for myself and everybody that's been in it.
Beautiful. And we'll put the links down the page as soon as we publish this on Integral Life, so that you can check those out. And then, in the meantime, if you go to Integral Life, either the homepage or integrallife.com/live, you'll see all the upcoming practice sessions for the next week. We've been updating the calendar weekly, so Ryan will put your practice up most likely in a few days.
Cool.
Along with the next batch. And again, I really hope everyone takes advantage of this opportunity.
Yeah.
Because it does feel like a really important evolution in the Integral project as we know it.
Yeah, wonderful. I'm excited to be a part of it too.
Yeah.
Cool.
Well, what do you think, bud? I would say let's see here and take some questions and stuff. But man, this video is kind of killing me. What do you think?
I'm okay either way. I think for me, I'm logistical in. I'm going to wrap up. If we're going to continue, I'd want to wrap up at 4:20 today, if that's okay. So we can either wrap up now. It's a good point. Or if there are any questions, we could do that for, next 10, 15 minutes maybe.
Yeah.
But it's up to you because I know the videos.
Your feed seems a lot better than mine. So maybe if you do most of the talking, it'll be less painful for our watchers.
Okay, yeah, I can tell if mine's bad or not.
So I'll give the spiel real quick. If you have any questions, if you're in Zoom with us, you can raise your hand. We'll turn on your camera, do some real time, or you can submit a question through the Q&A. We'll read it on air. And if you're watching on YouTube right now, you can leave a comment there. I know Ryan is watching it. I closed my browser window hoping that would help. It didn't.
Yeah. Cool. Let's see here.
Paula in the chat mentioned, I think when we were talking about journaling, she mentioned intelligent change 5-minute journal.
That one sounds familiar. There's a lot of good ones out there. I think, for me on the gratitude stuff, it's just a principle of like, make it really simple. It's writing, really finding a way to drop into your experience and feeling what you really feel grateful for in this moment. And it gets momentum. In my experience, it gets momentum the more you do it. So like if you do it for 3 days straight, at first, maybe it's kind of like, maybe you're scratching your head and you're like, I don't know. But if you just open it wide open, this is my recommendation, is like, keep it really open to where just look around, you know what I mean? And it might be just like, wow, the weather's lovely outside, or that bird chirping is quite beautiful. Like maybe momentary, like you just look around and start asking the question, like, how do I feel about what I'm seeing? Like, oh, wow, I have a computer. That's amazing. I remember when there weren't computers. Some people maybe were born where there's always computers, but could be anything. So like, I know, because it can be tough days, and it's also a new practice to where like, man, maybe you're not able to find something you're grateful for. But after a while, I find it gets into a rhythm where you can drop in, and all it is taking that time, the 5 minutes maybe to do it.
And doing it with your partner is helpful too. So, you know, my wife and
Yeah.
I, we often do a sort of an appreciation
Oh,
practice
cool.
with each other. And again, that's great for the relationship, but it's also great just for your ongoing relationship with reality, you know, because you have this constant sort of outlet to
Mm,
express the genuine appreciation and gratitude that you have both for elements of your relationship and just pieces of your life that are going well and that you feel good about.
yeah, that's wonderful.
Yeah.
Someone YouTube asked, and they don't have just a username kind of thing, so I don't know what they're. Oh, Corey, are you here? Oh, oh, we lost Corey. I'll give him a minute to see if he pops back on here. I don't. It's never been made host of it, but I'll go ahead and respond while we're waiting for Corey about the nutrition piece. I'm not a nutritionist, and I'm not aware that Corey is either, so we can't really say much on that. But I can speak from my personal experience that nutrition seems very important, and I've had my own journey of like finding out what foods are good for me, and but it's my experience that my diet can really impact how I'm feeling. And interesting, like something like caffeine, something that can ramp up the nervous system and the energy. But people are very different. So like I have a friend from Croatia who could pound 2 espressos late at night and sleep like a baby. My partner uh, can have a cup of coffee multiple times a day or late at night and no biggie. Me, I have a sip of this much coffee and I'm wired, so I have to be very careful with my system personally. um, so my experience is just like experimenting with how I feel in my diet. Oh, hey Corey, you're
Whoa,
back.
that was weird. My
Yeah,
computer,
look.
my computer just completely rebooted.
Oh, maybe your computer was freaking out. Anyway, I kept going. It gave me a host, and so I kept talking. I responded to the question about nutrition.
Oh man, I missed it.
But I was just saying, like, we're not nutritionists, but I do find that the food impacts me, and have to pay attention to that kind of thing. Um, and sometimes it's a longer journey too. Like it's not so obvious. Like it may take a month or months to really feel. Because man, I know like sometimes cutting some out, there's withdrawal, from the foods, and then is that because my body was used to a certain substance or a certain food type, or is it because I'm missing something? It gets complicated. But my rule of thumb is that I remember once back when I lived in Boulder, it became apparent to me that uh, food diet was the new religion. Like for progressive folks, like they didn't have like religion, but it was just like, this is the new diet and this is how you shall eat.
Hmm.
And, and it's like, calm down. I think there's a little bit more diversity in our body types, and what's good for us. But that's my opinion.
When it comes to nutrition, I always have to remind myself that it's not all about the upper right, right? What's
Yeah.
good for you in the upper right.
Yeah.
Sometimes you got to feed what's good for you in the upper left. And
Yeah.
for me, that's candy and ice cream.
I know. Yeah. Like it, yeah, I don't hold to rules except for I hold the like the just personal experience of like where is this food at for me? How do I feel? And I roll with that. But I
Mhm.
try to I do I've sought out many resources in the past, but I have to like process it. And I tend to stay away from anybody who like is too absolute about something.
Mm.
There's some things, meaning like vegetables, they're like vegetables good. It's like, yeah, that's pretty much, I'm not gonna like argue that ever, like vegetables generally good.
I used to have a fun argument with Sean Phillips way back
Yeah,
in the day. He used to come to our events and teach, sort of the nutrition
yeah,
module as well as his fit process.
yeah.
And one of the things that he would say to the attendees is, remember, food is just energy, and just relate to it as energy. I mean, this is, you want the best energy you can possibly put into your body so that, and I was like, well, wait.
Uh-huh.
By minimizing our entire experience of food, which is a 4 quadrant, very rich
Yeah, right,
experience,
right,
right? To
right.
reduce it just to the upper right, like this is energy. It's like, well, first off, you're taking away like so much of my enjoyment of
Yeah,
life.
right, right,
you know,
right, right.
I get so much from food.
Yeah,
We enjoy food so
yeah,
much, and it's clearly a 4 quadrant enjoyment. So I always
yeah.
kind of
No, I
tease
think it's
people about
super,
that.
super important. I'm with you on that one. I tend to
Yeah,
be more flexible in that sense.
yeah.
Well, I don't see any other questions popped up.
Hey, I will say this, man. If we had these, speaking of fear and how we can
Yep.
kind of, get a handle on it, if these technical difficulties happened a year ago, I'd be in like a flop sweat right now.
So there is improvement.
It
There is,
shows how sitting in the fear kind of gets you out of the fear over time.
yeah, totally, man. You've racked up who knows how many hours now of being on the microphone and in front of the camera for Integral Life. So I imagine you're like cruising at this point. You can handle those bumps.
I mean, some bumps are bigger than others, but
Yeah, yeah. But I was more in the thing of like, remember, I always think of the Talladega Nights. I don't know if did you see that movie where Will Ferrell's being interviewed and he's like doing this with his hands. I felt that way for just a brief moment when the thing was like, "You're now host." I'm like,
it's like,
I've been on camera plenty of times, so it's not really like I'm nervous, but I'm just like, I'm never usually host of this show, so, or like the main host. Like we're both hosts here, but like you're Corey.
it's you're Garth in Wayne's World.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
right. Yes. Um. So yeah,
Well,
cool. Well, hope this was useful for some folks to think about.
yeah, I hope this was helpful.
I enjoyed the conversation.
Yeah, totally. Well, and I
Yeah.
and I invite folks too. One of our first invitations here is be vulnerable. Let us know what you're actually afraid of, and you can do so in the comments right down there, whether you find this on YouTube or on Integral Life or what have
Yep.
you. Open a
Please shoot that.
dialogue.
I would say this is like I would say even more than invitation. I request that
Right?
if you're gonna do any, if you're gonna throw some out, critical out, fine, welcome it. We're always welcome that.
Yep.
But please include your own vulnerable fear. Given the
Mhm.
spirit of this particular episode, please share that in a real authentic way, not like some way where it's like, Corey, I fear you're a dumbass. It's just like,
I
no,
fear you're
that's
right.
or me, Ryan, I fear you're a dumbass, and I fear you're right. Just where it's a disguise, not really a fear. It's just like a way of saying like what you want to say. Like, no, see if we can share that. If you feel comfortable with it, don't feel forced. You have to force yourself to be that vulnerable because it is online. I get it. And comment threads can suck sometimes on YouTube. Generally speaking, Integral Life's comment threads are fairly nice.
Oh
There's
yeah,
some
especially on integrallife.com. That's a
especially
really
on
great thing.
integrallife.com.
Yep.
YouTube, sometimes we get a few pop in there where
YouTube can be difficult.
yeah. But anyways,
Well, brother, this has been great talking to you, man.
yeah, been great talking to you.
And I look forward to playing more Battlefield with you and Vince, hopefully soon.
Working with our fear there.
Yeah.
Yeah, man.
That's
Great.
right.
Well, thanks y'all.
Yeah. In the meantime, everyone, thanks for joining us. And stay tuned next month. We're going to do a special pre-election show, which I think we're going to title Inhabit Your Democracy.
Yeah, it's gonna be a fun one, I think.
It's gonna be a good one.
Okay.
All right, guys.
Wonderful.
Take care.